Hey there, my name is Megan and welcome to my channel, or welcome back. Today I'm going to be recommending some perfect books for y'all to read in the month of October. These are all spooky, creepy, atmospheric books that I really enjoyed. I have some adult and some young adult to recommend to y'all, so stay tuned. But before we go ahead and get on into the recommendations, if you're not already subscribed to my channel, please hit that subscribe button as well as the little like icon and the bell button. It really helps support my channel. Also, you can check down in the description box below for links to my Amazon shop where I list all of the books that I recommend on my channel, as well as my Patreon where I do seasonal book giveaways. I'm going to start with my adult books first, and the first one is Survive the Night by Riley Sager. This is an adult thriller, and I read it over summertime. I really do enjoy Riley Sager overall as an author, and to be honest, this was not my favorite Riley Sager book, but I'm going to tell you why I recommend it for the October season, and I do have a full review for this book, so I'll link that up in the cards if you want to hear me go into more depth about my thoughts regarding this book. In Survive the Night, we are following a girl named Charlie, and Charlie has decided to leave college forever because her best friend Maddie got murdered by the serial killer known as the Campus Killer, and Maddie is just not handling it well. So she wants to go back home, which is a couple hours away from the college where she lives. And this takes place in the 90s. So Charlie ends up agreeing to share a ride with a guy that she found via this ride board at their college. And she doesn't really know this guy. His name is Josh, but he's going in the direction she is. So she agrees to ride with him through the night in order to get back home. And Charlie, as she is riding with Josh in the car, just the two of them, starts to think that he is actually the campus killer. And the reason that I recommend Survive the Night is because Riley Sager just created such an atmospheric book, because a lot of the setting takes place just within this car, and the feelings of unease with regards to Josh being in the driver's seat and Charlie not knowing if she is going to survive the night was just very well done. And they're literally driving in the middle of the night through all these podunk parts of the country where there's no one around that can help her. She doesn't have a cell phone. And just the feelings of isolation added to the creep factor. Not only that, but Charlie is self-admitted to the reader as having these hallucinations, and she has been on medication to help subdue them, and it's almost like a form of schizophrenia from the way I took it. So a lot of the time when Josh says things that incriminate him as being a killer, we don't know if he actually said them or if Charlie is having an hallucination. And there is another creepy setting towards the end of the book at this old abandoned resort where he ends up basically taking her. So that definitely had slasher film type vibes. The reason that this was not my favorite Riley Sager book was the antagonist of the book. I didn't really like how that part of the storyline played out. However, I do really think it's a good book to read. It's fast-paced. I think the audiobook was about 9 hours. If you want something quick to get through on a dark night home alone in the month of October. Next, we have The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. This is an adult thriller, and I do have a full review for this book, which I'll link up in the cards. And in this book, we are following a criminal psychotherapist named Theo, and he has taken a case involving a woman named Alicia. And Alicia has been accused of murdering her husband, and ever since this was discovered, she has not spoken a word. So she was convicted, found guilty, and then sent to a prison, I think for the criminally insane type thing. So Theo decides to see if he can get her to talk and really find out exactly what happened the night of her husband's murder. So that all sounds like a very interesting enough premise, but this book was just so much more than that. So we're following from Theo, the therapist's point of view, but then we're also following from Alicia's point of view. We're reading diary entries of hers. And we do learn that Alicia has dealt with some mental illnesses in the past, and we also learn that she has been feeling like someone has been following her. And she talks about in these journal entries leading up to her husband's murder about this man that she thinks has been stalking her. And the reader doesn't know if it is legitimate or if she is hallucinating. And that actually ties in to the whole story and Theo's plot line as well. So what I really appreciated about this book is that we have two unreliable narrators, and at first glance, we don't know that Theo is unreliable. So two unreliable narrators. We have a woman who is seeing a guy stalking her. The guy's trying to get into her house, very creepy. And then we also have the setting of like this, essentially this criminally insane asylum. And we don't know from Theo's point of view if Alicia actually is insane. And there are scenes in here where she physically attacks him and like leaves little tidbits and little crumbs for him as he's trying to unravel what actually happened the night she killed her husband. So you have a murder mystery, two plot lines, unreliable narrator, stalking. It was just so well done. I could not put this book down. I finished it very quickly. Everything about this book kept me engaged, and I will tell you that you do have to pay attention to every single detail, because there are details that I thought like were super, super not important, and I was wondering why the author was including them, and then it does play into the entire story as a whole. So I highly, highly recommend The Silent Patient as well. Next, we have the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. Yes, this is a vampire story. And with regards to vampires, vampires have been done over and over and over again. And I always say that if I'm going to read about vampires, I want to read a story where the author spins it in such a way that it is new and fresh. And this book definitely did this. So in this book, we're following a MC, a main character, and for the life of me, I cannot remember her name. But we're following basically her point of view. She is a housewife in the late 80s, and she lives in South Carolina, in Charleston, and we're following her and her family. And she is also part of this book club, and all of these women read like these true crime books. And one day this man moves into their neighborhood, and our main character starts to suspect that he's not what he seems. She does some digging and then believes that he is a vampire. And obviously she takes this information to her friends at her book club and like her husband, and really no one is supporting her. They think that she is just slandering this poor man's name. And it actually goes over the course of a couple of years as our main character is continually trying to prove that this man is a vampire. And the reason that I recommend this book is that it definitely has some horror elements. And what I found really interesting is that you have like the housewife slash Southern homemaker scenes completely juxtaposed with a horror scene of this man being a vampire. And it's just like you're reading this normal everyday scenes of this woman, and then it's like blood sucking. And the way that he just incorporated this and wove the horror elements into like the most boring parts of the story was so good. And his writing of the horror scenes made me feel actual grossness and disgust. And I feel like if you're a horror writer and you're able to make me feel disgust, like you are a good horror writer. And what I really also liked about this book is that the traditional way that you think of a vampire feeding on a victim is not how the vampires feed in this book. And it is graphically described and a little bit unsettling. And some reviews I read said that it was like a little too much for the reader. I personally didn't find it to be that disturbing or disgusting, and I had to keep reminding myself that he was a vampire. But it's definitely different in how he gets his blood, as well as how he can be killed. So obviously, it talks about slaying a vampire, so the women do try to slay the vampire, and how he needs to be put down is definitely a lot more labor intensive than you would think about any other type of vampire. So this is definitely a horror book, a little bit of a thriller book, kind of woven into a normal housewife story. So I really, really liked it. I was really surprised by it. It made me feel an array of emotions, from anger to disgust to being proud of these women. So I highly recommend it, especially if you're looking for like a fresh take on a vampire story. Now I have 3 YA books I'm going to recommend y'all, and I read all of these books this year, and they all have a similar motif, and I totally did not plan this, but they all have a lot to do with like plants and poisons. And that is actually something that I really, really like in a book. So I guess that makes sense why I would read books that incorporated that. I just didn't mean to read all 3 of these this year. But if you like one of these books, then you will definitely like the others. The first book is Belladonna by Adeline Grace. In this book, we're following a girl named Signa. She's an orphan, and she is set to inherit her parents' wealth when she turns 20 years old, and she's 19. And death kind of follows Signa wherever she goes. She has been passed around from relative to relative, and every time she goes to live with a new relative, they die. And Signa actually has some otherworldly abilities herself. So first off, she can thwart death, and she can summon death. And death is a character in this book, think like a grim reaper, and she can converse with him and so on and so forth. The focus of this book is actually a murder mystery. So Signa is brought to live with another distant relative, and the matriarch of the house, who was her relative, died by poisoning, and the ghost of her aunt summoned Signa and said, basically, can you help solve the mystery of who murdered me? Additionally, her cousin is now sick and is slowly being poisoned by the same poison that killed the matriarch. And Signa doesn't know who's doing it. No one knows it's a poisoning. She uncovers this information. So the reason that I recommend Belladonna is for a lot of reasons. Number one, it's really atmospheric, and you're following a girl that can see and interact with death. It's a murder mystery, and someone is slowly murdering the people of this house, her family, through poisoning, Belladonna specifically. And you have like a Grim Reaper type character. And Signa obviously interacts and sees ghosts. The setting of this book is super creepy. It takes place at this old, creepy manor. So we have like the atmosphere, the plot line. It's definitely like a very fall read, and I really enjoyed it. I do have a full review for this book, so I'll link it up in the cards if you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts. Next, we have House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland. This book I read recently. I also have a full review of it, so I'll link that up for you guys if you want to hear, my more in-depth thoughts. But in this book, we are following three sisters. And when they were young, they were kidnapped, gone for an entire month, and then suddenly reappeared. And none of the girls remember anything that happened during that month. So we're following Iris. She's our main character, her sister Vivi, and her sister Gray. And Iris is the point of view we're reading from. And in this book, the older sister Gray actually goes missing, and Iris and Vivi are trying to figure out, if she was kidnapped, killed, what happened to her. And as they are investigating her disappearance, that kind of leads them back to what happened when they were children, where they went. And when they were kidnapped, once they returned, the girls came back different. They looked a little bit different. Their eyes were black, their hair was white, and they had these like magical abilities where they could basically get people to do what they wanted through touch. So that is like their magical ability. And I really like this book because the author definitely incorporated a lot of imagery, and just the whole idea of children being kidnapped and really not knowing what happened during that kidnapping is creepy enough. And then this is a type of portal fantasy because the girls do have to enter this in-between world, kind of this existence between living or life and death. And it kind of reminded me of the upside down world in Stranger Things. And it's creepy, it's dead, it's decaying. There are these dying beings there. There are these ghosts that linger. So there's definitely a creep factor to this book. And once we actually learn what happened when these girls were kidnapped and kind of the truth behind all of their identity, definitely some unsettling things that go on there. So this book is a mystery. This book is a portal fantasy. This book does have, child kidnapping and murder woven into it. So it's definitely very atmospheric if you're looking to read that in the month of October. And finally, we have House of Root and Ruin by Aaron A. Craig. This is a companion to House of Salt and Sorrows, but it's definitely a lot different from what I remember reading. And in this book, we're following the youngest daughter, or the youngest girl, sister, and her name is Verity. In my opinion, you do not have to have read House of Salt and Sorrow to read this because this is entirely Verity's story. All you have to know about Verity is that she can see ghosts, and that is evident from the beginning of the book. It's not a spoiler or anything like that. But Verity sees ghosts, and she is also a very talented painter. And her older sister Camille, who is a duchess, kind of keeps Verity hidden away because her abilities she doesn't want anyone to know that her sister can see ghosts because she might be locked up in a madhouse, and she just doesn't want anyone to know. But Verity wants to explore the world on her own and kind of take charge of her own life. So a duchess at a neighboring land reaches out to Verity and wants her to come and paint her son's portrait. Camille does not want Verity to go, but Verity sneaks out and goes on her own. And once she comes to this new land named Bloem, she ends up staying with the Duchess and the Duke and their son at this huge manor named Chantilly, I think is how you pronounce it, Chantilly. So once Verity arrives at Chantilly and gets to know the family and gets to know the son, she starts to uncover some secrets regarding the family and some things that have happened at the house, some things that they are covering up. And it kind of has a lot to do with her because they actually commissioned her to come for a specific reason. So the reason that I'm recommending House of Root and Ruin is I feel like this book is more bizarre than it is creepy. Don't get me wrong, Aaron A. Craig is a fantasy horror writer. There is definitely a creep factor in this. There are ghosts in this. Verity is visited by a harbinger, a very like evil type god who manifests itself to her in the form of like a ghost. There is poisoning in this book. There is human experimentation in this book. So there is a lot of creepy things that go on. And I've heard this like compared, or not compared, but referenced to The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells, which I have not read. However, spoiler, I just ordered it from Amazon because I've always wanted to read it. So if you've read that book, then that might kind of clarify some things that go on in this book. So it's definitely creepy. It definitely made me squirm at some points when we found out the truth of what the Duke, the head of this house, was actually doing and why he wanted Verity there. And I just love books that incorporate like the use of natural poisons and things like that. Definitely disturbing, definitely bizarre, definitely weird, and a little bit creepy. So definitely a good October read. All right, you guys, that is it for some books that I recommend for the month of October. If you like creepy, bizarre, spooky, I enjoyed every single one of them. Let me know in the comments if you read any of these books and what you thought of them, or if you have any recommendations for spooky, creepy reads in the month of October, and I will see y'all in another video soon. Goodbye!